We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's September 13th here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yeun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Choi Ji-hee.
Good morning, Yoon.
Good morning, and Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. As part of efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and slow down climate change, Seoul City will be introducing a new all-in-one climate card next year. This monthly pass gives unlimited rides on Seoul's buses, subway, and even the bicycle sharing system, and the pass costs around $48 a month. It will have a trial run from January to May next year, and it's expected to go into full operation in the second half of next year. Moving on, recently researchers in South Korea has found a correlation between COVID-19 and Bell's palsy. This is a condition that causes sudden weakness in facial muscles, causing one's face to droop. And the latest research finds that those who haven't been vaccinated or didn't get their second shot and caught COVID-19 have an 84% higher chance of suffering from Bell's palsy. Those who caught COVID but have been vaccinated still had a 20% higher chance of acquiring this compared to those that haven't been affected with this virus. And here in Korea, a heated topic of discussion is how far production teams at movies and dramas should go to ensure a smooth filming environment. That's because recently a father-to-be shared a post online about how he was stopped from seeing his 33-week pregnant wife, who was admitted to a high-risk maternity ward after having a hemorrhage. Now, while trying to enter the hospital's main building, staff from a drama team stopped him from passing by, saying they were in the middle of a shoot. And the production team of this particular drama has apologized. They said they will be more cautious and try to abide even better to filming regulations agreed upon with the hospital where they're filming. But this hasn't calmed down many online users who heard of this incident. Some mentioned how drama and movie staff are causing a nuisance or inconveniences in public places. And what do you think about this issue, Walter?
Well, I'm really hoping that this is a one-off when it comes to, hospital situations. I really hope that production teams are aware that it is a hospital first, and far down the line, is it a movie or drama production last, or a background for their production. Especially in this sort of situation when you have a father who is deeply distressed and under a lot of panic, wanting to see his wife, and it's sad, a very sad situation. They should have apologized, and they did. And like I said, I just hope this is a one-off, and movie production should really not be in hospitals, I think.
Because as you mentioned, this is a real-life situation. As for the drama team or the movie production team, they're just making a virtual story for people to actually enjoy at home. But we're talking about a life and death situation, right?
Exactly. I feel like Walter can relate very well, as he himself is a father too, has recently had a daughter. And I fully share Walter's opinion. Although the mother wasn't blocked from going to the ward and she wasn't really at risk, I mean, the husband should have been allowed to go. And I feel like you said, these public places aren't just any public place, but it's where life and death situations are faced. And I feel like production teams, they should abide by stricter guidelines and make sure that they prioritize the actual function and operation of these important public places.
And I think it stirred even more anger amongst the public, because this is not a one-time thing. We've seen this happen repeatedly in the past. A lot of controversy because drama teams would apologize temporarily, but we would still see this go on and forth. So we need better regulations. And that was our news feed for this Wednesday. Let's now head straight into our main discussion topic. Mugshots have ignited a fierce debate in Korea. Why? Take a look at the screen to find out. Mugshots are routine images taken for criminal identification. Unlike most parts of the world, though, Korea doesn't reveal them to the public without the consent of the person involved. That's why heavily photoshopped photos and hard-to-identify old ID cards are often revealed instead. While some criticize Korea's relatively lenient rules when it comes to disclosing a suspect or criminal's mugshots, some say that this is only natural, given that disclosing a criminal's mugshot could be detrimental to their families and an infringement of their human rights. Today, we're going to be focusing on what we think about revealing personal info about a suspect or their mugshots. So, Chihi, why don't you start us off by explaining how this mugshot controversy has stirred up recently here in South Korea?
Sure. So as we know, we've seen a lot of violent crimes recently, which has led to the release of criminal identities. And the whole purpose of this is to prevent similar crimes from happening in the future based on the severity of the crime, as well as the availability of the evidence, and also the public interest. And all this, of course, is for the public safety. However, there's been a controversy recently over the effectiveness of the release of these mugshots. And that's because often they're retouched and they don't reflect the actual appearance of the offender in their current state. So this makes it really difficult for members of the public to recognize the offender if they encounter them in the street, for example. And so as a result, there are growing calls for mandatory disclosure of up-to-date mugshots that accurately reflect the current appearance of the criminals.
That's a very good point. Mugshots taken by the police should be disclosed to the public because, as you mentioned, right now in Korea, most of the criminals or suspects' photos are either very heavily photoshopped or old ID photos, which is really hard to see their faces. But what about you, Walter? Could you also explain to us why this mugshot controversy has stirred here in Korea?
Yeah, so actually to talk about what Chihi said earlier as well, like I don't know if even releasing a mugshot will deter a person from committing a crime, even though like in Korea we do cover their faces. But in recent times, we've also seen, actually as early as a couple of months ago, the same situation with Jung Yoo-jung, who was the woman in Busan who killed a student. And also, as we just saw then, that was the Hilimdong sexual assault murderer, Choi Yoon-jung. His picture was released, and luckily, I don't think that was photoshopped. It seemed to be a very authentic photo.
It was a mugshot,
It was a mugshot, yes. So, which is, in Korean society, as we mentioned earlier, we only release mugshots when it is deemed a heinous crime. However, I just don't think that's a good enough reason. It still baffles me that South Korea actually still has this law to present day when many other countries don't as well. I think it is in the public interest to know what an accused criminal does look like. The argument, as we mentioned before, could be that it ruins a person's reputation, but I would argue that if you are proven innocent, the public will still give you a good reputation. They won't look down on you. They'll even maybe empathize with you.
I think what really shocked the Korean public, though, was that Choi Yoon-jung, the recent, as you mentioned, the Shilimdong, the assailant there, he was the second one to only have his mugshot revealed to the public. Only the second. And we've seen so many crimes here in Korea. And until now then, we've only seen criminals' faces through either very heavily photoshopped photos or old photos of them, which is really hard to identify, which is why millennials and Gen Z are calling for a stronger need for South Korea to reveal the mugshots to the public, even though there's debate that this could be an infringement of human rights. Where do you guys stand on that?
Well, let me show you a graph that actually reflects the average opinion of the people here in the country. So if you look on the screen, the pie graph, which is a result of a survey conducted on around 750 South Koreans, revealed that over 95% of the participants believe that revealing mugshots of felony offenders should be mandatory. Now, the primary reason behind this is that felons should be identifiable and avoidable once they're released from jail after serving their sentence. So this is prioritizing the public safety. And they also argue that the mugshots should be as close to the actual appearance, like I said, of the offender as possible to encourage people to actually report any suspicious behaviors and reduce the likelihood of similar crimes in the future as well. And the public's opinion is that felons are individuals who have grossly violated the fundamental rights of people, right? Innocent people. Therefore, they really deserve to have their identity publicized and criticized.
Right. I think that's a very strong argument that you mentioned. Some are saying if these criminals have already stripped off the fundamental human rights of another human being, why should their rights be overly protected? Where do you stand on this issue?
Well, I absolutely agree with Chihi, and I am for releasing the mugshots, but there are obviously a lot of, well, that very small percent, they have concerns that, if we make this mandatory disclosure of mugshots, affects the families basically of those people who are, innocent until proven guilty, or even the fact that if they are even proven guilty, that it might cause them harm or mental stress that they might suffer. Personally, I don't think this is a good enough reason or strong enough reason for us not to release the photos, because I think, as I said, it is in the public's interest to know. If we have to understand as well that if we give the benefit of the doubt to police officers, they do a lot of investigating into obviously a suspect. They're not just going to release a mugshot or a photo of this person unless they've done their research. And so by the time that this person has been put out to the public, it means that they're more than likely, hopefully in most cases, going to be the ones that committed the crime.
That's a very good point, Walter, because last week we did discuss a very similar topic. We talked about the public actually disclosing the information of suspects out there. But the difference with last week and this week is that the police would be the ones revealing these photos and information, specifically mugshots. And we asked if our viewers were for or against revealing mugshots, and here's what 3 of them had to say. Take a look at the screen to find out. Let's start with Tiris Bell. Tiris Bell said in the United States, it depends. For adults, mugshots are usually considered public records, meaning that anyone can access them. Of course, there are restrictions. Jamu Ojisan said, I think it's better to publish their mugshots. Society has the right to know, especially when the crime is heinous. And Shar said, for adults, mugshots should be available only after being convicted of a crime. If that person is found to be not guilty, their reputation and that of their families could be tarnished irreparably by public opinion. So that's all our viewers' comments. Thank you so much for sharing your insights there. And now I would like to expand our discussion as to find out how mugshots are dealt with other parts of the world, starting with you, Chi.
Well, it's common practice in the US and Europe to release mugshots of individuals to media or on websites. And regardless of the severity of the offense, it's quite different in the US from our country because authorities take mugshots of individuals upon their arrest. And recently, a mugshot of former US President Trump was released. It was the first time in August for Trump to have had his mugshot taken. And there's also mugshots of famous figures like Tiger Woods, as you see in 2017. He was suspected for driving under influence. There's James Brown, and there's also Paris Hilton and other celebrities such as Hugh Grant, who have also been made public and even sold as merchandise as well. Now, the right of the public to be informed about crimes and to protect themselves is prioritized over the human rights of these criminals.
Right.
And also in neighboring Japan, although there's no official mugshot publication system, it's a well-established principle there in the country to report real names in the media. Faces and real names are often made public, reported, as they are considered important measures of the public safety.
All for public safety. How are other countries doing it?
Well, for Australia, it is obviously common practice like the US and Europe. I know that if you are even suspected of a murder, that people very well know about what's happening, the name, sometimes even the location. What I just remembered is that here in Korea, we do have an application for sex offenders that actually releases images of their face. And though I find it interesting that that hasn't been like an interesting topic to cover as well when it comes to releasing the faces of people, because I know that with that application, you can actually find out exactly where they live, what they look like, how old they are, and also I believe their names. So the fact that this is a debate that is still happening when we already kind of have these measures in place is quite interesting.
But I think the limitation to that application, though, if you're in the area, you can see it. If you're a resident in the same district living with a sex offender, you have access to this information. But if you're not a resident, you're not able to access this information or share it. So that's another debate we'll be talking about in the future. But in the meantime, let's find out more about how mugshots are dealt with in other parts of the world, and if there's any leeway or room for Korea to actually adopt any of the policies that's been implemented globally. We're now going to talk to an associate professor of criminal justice from Rutgers University Newark. It's Dr. Sarah Lageson. Great to have you on our show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Dr. Lageson, could you tell us a bit more about how the United States decides to reveal a mugshot? What's the exact process like?
Sure. When a person is arrested and booked at a local jail in the US, typically they're fingerprinted and their photograph is taken. But each state does have slightly different rules about revealing a mugshot to the public, and sometimes even within a single state, some local jurisdictions have their own set of rules. But generally across the US, a mugshot is considered a public record, so the police can release it to the public, sometimes via their social media or on their website that tracks people entering the jail. And once it's online, local news organizations, or really anybody on the internet, can legally repost that mugshot. Unfortunately, this also means that some extortion websites, public shaming websites, will also copy and repost those mugshots.
Before we go on to the second question, are there any regulations to stop that, though?
Some states in recent years have begun to pass new laws. Some of those laws target the extortion websites. So they say a website cannot charge a takedown fee to have a mugshot removed. Some local jurisdictions, such as San Francisco, have decided not to reveal mugshots for low-level offenses and to only reveal a mugshot if the person is at large or if the police need input from the public and there's a compelling reason to release the mugshot. But there's a lot of differences between jurisdictions. It's certainly an issue that's evolving over time.
Right. So, Professor, well, apart from a mugshot, then, how much information about a criminal is revealed to the public?
Quite a bit. This too varies by jurisdiction, but typically the mugshot will include a person's full name. The police can also reveal the arrested person's date of birth, sometimes their home address or the city that they live in, their height, their weight, their skin color, their eye color, and sometimes even whether or not they have tattoos.
Yeah, actually, it's really quite interesting because what I've noticed as well on social media, especially on Facebook, is that you don't even have to be a suspect. You could just be a person of interest to the police. And what they do is they put up what you just mentioned, a lot of about the person's height, weight, color, also tattoos that may be revealing to identify the person. But as a criminal justice professor, what do you think are the pros and cons behind revealing a criminal's mugshot or personal information to the public?
Well, some people argue that releasing the mugshots helps keep the police accountable because the public can see who's being arrested, and that this overall would lead to more transparency. And of course, the police argue that it helps them to get tips and more information from the public. But I think there's a lot more cons in the way that it's unfolded in the US. So millions of people are arrested each year in the United States, and most of them are accused of very low-level offenses. Many people are struggling with mental health issues and are just not the type of people that police are deeply investigating. So when that mugshot is released by the police and then onto the internet, a person can be shamed for the rest of their life. And you mentioned this earlier, but it's important to remember that in the US, a mugshot just reflects the arrest, not a conviction. So the photos are really of legally innocent people who may have been wrongfully arrested or have their charges dropped later once they see a judge. But the mugshot stays online, and this really implies that that person is guilty. Like I said, it gets posted to many, many websites. Sometimes people are paying those hefty fees of thousands of dollars to have a mugshot removed from one website, and then it just shows up on another website. And the research I've done has shown all these instances of discrimination that can happen based on an old mugshot, sometimes from a decade ago, when a person applies for a job or rents an apartment, or even if they're online dating or meeting other families at their children's school, or they want to volunteer at their church. And that's because their name is attached to it. So just doing a simple internet search for somebody's name will reveal the photo.
I see. Then, Professor, very briefly, I have one last question for you. Do you think South Korea is going the right direction as to when and how it's revealing its mugshots? It's quite rare, actually.
I think the rarity is the right move. I think that being very thoughtful about the rationale for releasing the mugshot is the most important policy consideration. The problem in the US is that this is just a bulk disclosure of any mugshot. And of course, this reflects all sorts of the problems we have with the criminal legal system and bias in the system. And it really marks a lot of people as criminal when they're not. But it sounds to me from your reporting that in South Korea, this is a very thoughtful exercise with public support and public buy-in. So as long as the framework remains around a compelling or heinous case, that seems like a positive direction.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Lageson. It was a pleasure hearing from you today.
Thank you.
Dr. Lageson mentioned very interesting points, and it was a good comparison with South Korea and the United States. So based on what we just heard now, how would you guys like to see the mugshot situation go on from here in Korea?
Well, I liked how she said we're going in the right direction because we're being really thoughtful and careful with our process. And I feel like we are really making progress in the country because recently the National Assembly has suggested some changes to the current law. And according to these changes, the release of a suspect's face must occur within 30 days of the decision to do so. And while I believe in giving people a second chance, this should not apply to those who have committed a felony. And in this case, the safety of the public, of course, must be given priority over the human rights of these criminals.
Right, I agree. As Dr. Lageson said, if they're low-level offenses, and if they're young, for instance, if they're teenagers, I think that's another issue and angle we need to focus on, whether just revealing everyone mugshots is the right answer, because as she mentioned, they could be uploaded and exploited online. But at the same time, I do understand why the majority of the public, as you mentioned, 95%, right?
Yeah.
9 out of 10 Koreans actually want the suspect's information to be disclosed, and I partly think that has to do with how cautious the police are as to be revealing a mugshot and when they decide to disclose one's information. What do you think about that?
I think it's quite interesting, actually. Dr. Lageson really did open my eyes to certain points of view that I didn't think about. Example would be like when a person would go on a date and all they have to do is, Google the person's name and it comes up. So I did think that that was a very good point, that it is a very negative thing to have, especially even if you were considered innocent. I just hope the public are a bit more, I guess, mature about the whole situation and do more deeper dive, a deeper dive on the person if they're found innocent or guilty, for example. And I think a lot of people are quick to judge if you were, let's say, convicted of or not convicted of a crime, but you still haven't, arrested for anything, even if it wasn't your fault. So I do understand from that side of the story. I'm hoping that it's actually something that can be. There's obviously fine lines when it comes to crime. It's not such a simple thing of a yes and no. The way that we should be releasing mugshots is obviously when someone is convicted, but when we are very certain that this person has committed the crime, in my opinion. The minor offenses that she talked about is also interesting. I don't think it's necessary to put up someone's mugshot if they were drink driving, for instance, or even if it was a very minor case of public indecency, whatever it may be. So those minor ones, they don't need to be public.
But then again, how can we consider a crime to be minor or low offense, right? I think that's why it's so hard when we're dealing with criminal justice. It's so subjective. There's so many different definitions and standards we all have. And hopefully we'll bring this onto the table more often so we can have a better idea. But in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Chi Ji-hee.
Thank you.
And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.